Hello. I apologize for this being so late. I realize some of y'all work really hard to try to get your stuff done on time, and I hope that it's not so late that y'all don't get a chance to review it. I had some things come up earlier this week that kind of precluded me from getting this done. Nonetheless, it was a very interesting topic to me, appealing topic to me, so I wanted to put in my 2 cents worth regarding women in the revolution. Um, Admittedly, women in the revolution and revolutionary era are sort of underreported and underappreciated. Um, there are numerous names that we could focus on. I know that we've been studying Betsy Ross. The interesting thing about Betsy Ross, though, is that the story is almost apocryphal about her and the flag. It came out from a grandchild in the 19th century about her connection to George Washington and her contribution to having created the flag of the United States. So the jury's, at least in my opinion, the jury is still out regarding the full truth and knowing more about Betsy Ross than we already know. The woman, though, that I am most interested in regarding the Revolutionary Era is actually much better documented, and I think fascinating and interesting character, someone that we actually can know very well through her letters and correspondence, and that would be Abigail Adams, the wife of John Adams. Um, Abigail is interesting to me, is fascinating to me because you read her correspondence with John, you can see a couple, two people that really love each other. You see a good Christian couple that often has doubts. They are very real people, but yet they don't have a lot of the undercurrent of extraneous sexual tensions or affairs or any of that sordid stuff that you see on TV nowadays. The in John, to me, she's fascinating because John is a founding father who is interesting to me also, but he doesn't have the sex appeal that George Washington, a tall, handsome military man, or that Thomas Jefferson, a handsome, heavyweight intellectual, has. So he's kind of I like him because he's kind of the underdog. I like him because he's from New England. I have New England ties. His thought processes are very interesting to me, and his contribution to the revolution is I think very interesting. It's almost behind the scenes. Um, he was somebody that was guided very much by emotion, and Abigail was a great compliment to him because John often doubted himself. He doubted himself regarding the important decisions that he had to make regarding the Revolutionary War, regarding his envoy time in France. And one of Abigail's anecdotes I found in David McCullough's John Adams, and McCullough is a mainstream. You could consider him a mainstream historian. You could even consider him one of the progressive historians. However, I don't see him as necessarily someone who is revisionist or wants to change the image of John Adams. He handled his biography in a very deferential way. This is about Abigail's trip overseas. John had finally coaxed her into coming to Paris after he'd been over there for a year and a half as an envoy from the United States, from the new nation. And so Abigail was very anticipatory about making the trip. And so she expressed that in her letters. So she finally decided to do it, she screwed up her courage and did it. And the boat ride was treacherous. She had to share the cabin with swarthy sailors. There were families there that were not of middle class or upper class heritage or origin, and so made it a very challenging trip for her. It says, in the unrelieved dampness below decks, Abigail suffered severely from rheumatism. The food was inedible. The cook she described as lazy and dirty, with no more knowledge of his business than a savage. But with a favorable turn in the weather, finding she could get about, her usual spirit returned, and very like John Adams on board the Boston, she proceeded to make a bustle in her expression. And as I found, this is a quote, and as I found I might reign mistress on board without any offense, I soon exerted my authority with scrapers, mops, brushes, infusions of vinegar, etc., and in a few hours you would have thought yourself in a different ship. She took up the direction of our cabin, as she wrote in another account for her sister Elizabeth, taught the cook to dress his victuals, and have made several puddings with my own hands, which she mastered the names of all the masts and sails. The captain said he was sure she could take over at the helm as well. And then later on, she goes on to write, while she's watching the sea in the evening, relaxing and watching the phosphorescence of the sea, she says, "Great and marvelous are thy works, Lord God Almighty." And she recorded reverently. So, very deferential woman, very righteous woman. I think that she was, but however, with the cooks and crew, she was not condescending to them. It's a very American. It's a very American characteristic to be on level. All of us are created equal, and I think she was someone that really believed that.